In this episode of Stay Mindful with Dr. Evelyn Davis, I'll be talking about grief and how it touches our lives in ways we may not always recognize. We'll look at grief that comes from endings, change, and even from growth, and explore what it means to experience it in all of its forms. We'll also touch on how mindfulness can help us move through each one with compassion, honesty, and hope. Hello and welcome to Stay Mindful with me, Dr. Evelyn Davis. Today I want to talk about grief, and not just the kind we associate with death, but grief that can come from loss, change, and even growth. It's something we all experience, and yet we don't give ourselves permission to sit with it because of all the emotions that come with it. But what if we gave grief a chance to be part of a healthy journey, a process that helps us to slow down, feel, and honor what was? Throughout this episode, I want to take a mindful look at what grief can teach us. You might be surprised to discover what it reveals about love, resilience, and your own path in healing. Before we talk about how we cope with grief, it helps to understand what it is and what it can often look like. For example, one of my first introductions to grief, or rather what grief really was learning about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief in a social work class, my undergraduate class rather. We were learning that there were 5 stages that everyone goes through, which are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. My personal initial thoughts were that, this makes sense. I mean, when we think about how our families grieve, I know if you're like me, we definitely see some denial. There's also some anger sprinkled in there, just people trying to make sense of what is happening in that moment. But when I began to use this model in counseling, I realized something very important. Even though these stages are presented in a specific order, most people don't experience them in that way. In fact, it's impossible to use this model as a checklist for grief. Still, just to be clear, it does help us understand what the common responses are to loss. The truth is, grief does not follow rules. We may skip stages, circle back, or even feel several emotions at once. It's just not a linear experience. It's just us being human. As I've grown within the field of social work, and as a therapist, I've also come across other ways to describe the grieving process. One of those is the TEAR method. So that's TEAR, which includes 4 steps. The first one is T, to accept the reality of the loss. This means accepting it both intellectually and emotionally. That means head and heart. It's not about forgiveness. It's about recognizing the significance of the loss and how it affects you as a person. Next, you go on to E, which is experiencing the pain of the loss. In this stage, you name and make sense of your emotions, allowing yourself to feel those emotions and allowing it to help you process the pain rather than burying it away. So if you feel angry, name it. Say that you feel angry. If you feel sad, acknowledge that. Say that. The next part is A, which is adjusting to the new environment without the person. So this involves making practical changes. For someone who has lost a spouse, it may mean taking on new responsibilities or redefining your sense of identity and worldview. If there were bills that your spouse took care of, you have to come to terms with the fact that that is now your role. R is reinvesting in the new reality. And I know that this may be one of the hardest steps that someone can take, especially when friends and family are urging you to move on. In a TEDx talk that I just listened to from Tanya Villanueva Tepper, she was explaining that healing just isn't about letting go of the person or the memory. It's about releasing the expectations that are tied to the life that we once had. Reinvesting in that new reality allows us to create lasting place for our loved one in our hearts, while also leaving room for new relationships and possibilities. It helps us to find that balance between remembering and moving forward, keeping in mind that we're not moving on, but we're moving forward. Most recently, I came across another way to explain grief, the grief roller coaster. And I have to agree that sometimes grief truly feels like a roller coaster. The sudden drops of sadness, the sharp turns of anger, the loops of confusion and loneliness, and the brief stretches of peace and calm just before the next wave comes. This emotional journey can change from day to day and even moment to moment. The twists and turns often leave us feeling unsettled, disoriented, directionless, and sometimes discouraged by what feels like a constant setback or even a sense of being lost. I know that I have definitely experienced this. It's the natural rhythm of grief, the ebb and flow that reminds us healing isn't about getting over something, but learning how to live with it. But just like a roller coaster, grief can be workable when we stop trying to control the experience and allow ourselves to move through it. We eventually find steadier ground. It takes time, often more than we or others expect, but healing comes gradually. But grief isn't limited to death. Sometimes it shows up in the middle of change, when life shifts in ways that we didn't expect, or even when we're growing into something new. Personally, I don't think we talk about this form of grief enough. This is the kind that comes when we are evolving. We're experiencing it during big life changes, like starting a new job, going through a divorce, retiring, welcoming a new baby, or even coming into parenthood, or watching our children leave home. Even when change is good, it still can stir up feelings of uncertainty and sadness. Growth often asks us to leave something behind, old roles, familiar routines, and even parts of ourselves that no longer fit. It's really a bittersweet process. Mindfulness, though, can help us hold both the excitement of the new beginning and the ache of letting go. It gives us permission to pause, to breathe, and to feel what is real without judgment. Mindfulness helps us to make space for both sadness and then also gratitude, reminding us that both can exist at the same time. Okay, so far we've been able to talk about individual grief. I want to shift a little bit because grief doesn't just live in our individual stories. It can ripple outward, connecting us through shared experiences of loss, change, and uncertainty. We've seen this in 9/11. We've seen this during COVID. We've also experienced this through the mass job losses, family separations, and government shutdowns that have created stress and uncertainty. When looking more closely at collective grief, something stood out to me. Survivors often grieve on multiple levels. We may lose loved ones, experience community disruption, or feel that our sense of security has been violated. At times, there are heightened awareness of the world around us, or even frustrations with division and systemic issues. But this doesn't mean that healing is impossible. Collective grief reminds us that pain can be shared, and so can healing. It's also important to recognize that everyone grieves differently. For example, one person may grieve quietly and inwardly, while others may express their grief outwardly through anger and visible emotion. Although these reactions look different, Naming our experiences helps us to normalize them. It reminds us that we're not alone and that a sense of connection can be the first step towards moving forward together. So let's now just talk about how we can practice that, what that even looks like. Moving together, moving within our individual moments. What does that even look like? When we practice mindfulness, we can navigate grief in our daily lives. So this is how we can do it. I have 6 practical mindfulness tools. Number 1, we want to recognize the loss or shift. Start by acknowledging that you're grieving. That's number 1, is acknowledging it. Even if it doesn't look like sadness. Because remember, grief doesn't look the same for everyone. It can show up as irritability, exhaustion, or even relief in a situation. Naming it helps us to bring awareness and direction to what we are feeling. Number 2, breathe through it. When emotions feel big, come back to your breath. Slow and steady breathing calms your nervous system and it grounds you when life feels unpredictable. And if you like to practice this, I will be putting a mini episode that follows this that will help you walk through a simple exercise just to get started. Next, number 3, find meaning in the transition. Ask yourself, what is this season teaching me? Grief often reveals what matters most to us. It can be love, it can be connection, resilience, and even purpose. So taking time to see what season you're even in can definitely help you with the journey through your grief. Number 4, honoring what was. It's important to create small rituals that can help you acknowledge what matter. Some people do things like lighting candles for their loved ones that they have lost. Sometimes writing in a journal can help you. Visiting meaningful places. Or simply just, having gratitude for what you have given in or received from the loss is a good way of honoring what was. Number 5, we have being patient with healing. Remember, there's no timeline for grief. Healing doesn't mean forgetting also. It means remembering with peace. Heavy on the peace. You're not moving on. You're moving forward. And that's enough. Number 6 is connect. We do not have to carry the burden of grief alone. There are others who can understand what we're experiencing, and it's important to reach out to them. It's important for you to, during your time of grief, to reach out to a trusted friend, therapist, a faith leader, or even support groups. Just like mindfulness supports us in our own healing, it can also help us care for others working through their own pain by allowing us to see them instead of the grief. When we do this, it helps us to not offer quick reassurances like you'll feel better or I think it's time you moved on. Those words can sound dismissive and as if we're asking them to rush through their healing. Although we often want to take away the pain of others that we care about, grief isn't something that you fix because our emotions aren't problems to solve. They're reminders that we loved and that something or someone mattered to us deeply. What most people truly need is presence, patience, and permission to feel. Mindfulness helps us slow down enough to notice, to feel, and to stay open. Supporting someone who is grieving can feel uncomfortable because we want to make it better. But true support is about presence, not perfection. Ways we can do this for others is by listening more than you speak. You don't need the perfect words because listening is powerful. Sometimes people just need your ear. Also, allowing silence. I know that this may be awkward at times, but sometimes quiet presence says more than advice could ever. And then you also want to avoid timelines. The "you'll feel better soon" can minimize the experience. Trust the person's pace. They'll get there when they get there. Also, offer specific support. Instead of saying, "let me know if you need anything," try, "I can bring dinner on Thursday," or "I'm here to listen tonight." And then you also want to check in consistently, because grief lingers long after the first few weeks. You know the saying that after the funeral is over, then there's that silence. A simple message could mean everything to a person, whether it is the day after, whether it's the week after, or the month after. Making sure that you're checking in with that person could be so important. And then also, you want to mind your energy. Supporting someone else's pain can bring up your own. Take breaks, breathe, and care for your emotional well-being too, because there is no way to help others if your cup is empty. As we come to a close, I invite you to pause and turn inward, to reflect on your own experiences and consider how mindfulness can help you meet them with compassion. Grief looks different for everyone, and healing rarely moves in a straight line. So take a moment to think about where grief might be showing up in your own life, whether it's through loss, change, or even growth. Ask yourself, what changes, endings, or moment of growth have brought feelings of grief for you? How might you honor these experiences with mindfulness instead of judgment? Remember, there's no wrong answer. Simply notice what comes up and offer yourself understanding and grace as you do. Hold these reflections as you move into the mini episode that follows. And if someone you love is grieving, remember, you don't have to fix their pain. Sometimes the most healing thing we can offer is compassion, patience, and presence. Thank you so much for joining me today on Stay Mindful with Dr. Evelyn Davis. If this episode spoke to you, I'd love for you to subscribe, share, or leave a review. You can share your thoughts under this episode or connect with me on Facebook and Instagram at 413CS. Until next time, take care of your mind, nurture your spirit, and stay mindful. Thank you so much for joining me today on Stay Mindful with Dr. Evelyn Davis. If this episode spoke to you, I'd love for you to subscribe, share, and leave a review. You can find this podcast and past episodes on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. Be sure to follow so you don't miss any future episodes. And if you found this episode helpful for you, please share it with a friend.